Good afternoon, Facebook Live. This is Mike George coming at you from Crimson House in Alexandria, Louisiana. I have to say, I'm very disappointed in people, in us, really. I mean, myself included. And I say disappointment, like, in a sense, kind of cosmically, because you so often expect, and there's that word expect, that should already be a red flag right there, expectations. Damn it, I taught myself, or I guess I shouldn't say I taught myself, the Lord taught me vis-a-vis people and the world and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to keep your expectations low. Basically, I had kind of coined a formula, a very simple equation. Happiness equals reality minus expectations. So let's kind of dissect that a little bit, shall we? Happiness equals reality minus expectations. Basically, the whole theme of that equation is the lower your expectations of other people and places and things, the more pleasantly surprised you might find yourself when those expectations are surpassed. But of course, as is often the case with these types of things, there's kind of a converse corollary that when those low expectations are not met, you just kind of lose that much more faith in humanity. My goodness. So shoot, and I have to be fair here. I mean, there's a little, I caught up with an ex of mine from 5 years ago, from yesteryear, the year 2017, and I caught him up on my life a little bit. Mind you, it was an ex with which I think, I don't know, there was a little bit of turmoil in the whole hullabaloo of the way we broke up and everything, but nothing to the extent of what happened with me and Jared in Portland, the rapist. So yeah, I managed to kind of fill him in on sort of like the last 5 years of my life, including, yes, my Portland shit show. I think we've dubbed that, at least I've managed to dub that before, the She-bacle. Now, for some of the kids out there who might be new to the program and might not have the context of what happened in Portland to me, well, in a nutshell, let's see. Goddamn, I try to give the Cliff's Notes version here without getting too caught up in trauma. So essentially, and around late July, August 2020, at that time I was working in Portland at Portland General Electric in their transmission operations center. The big mission control style room where you control the grid. And at that time in August 2020, we had some awful fucking wildfires. Now, let me first say that I was not directly ever in the path of the damn thing. Personally, I was not myself in imminent danger of being burned alive. Thank the fuck God. Nonetheless, there are vivid memories that I carry still to this day, 2 years later almost, of the screen of what was on the screen in front of me in our grid control center. It's basically a map of the system, a diagram of the electrical system of PGE, and it's kind of one of these fancy maps, that you see nowadays, like a GIS based map with several layers on the screen that we're looking at together, as a company. Now, mind you, these facilities are tightly controlled, for reason being that, we want to prevent people that aren't authorized to be in there, like terrorists or just, teenage troublemakers, whatever, jealous ex-boyfriends. We want to prevent any potential sabotage to the grid. And mind you, this is a transmission level facility, so this is we control entire cities' power, essentially. So anyways, in that control center, I remember very vividly everything being red. And let me first give you some context as to what the hell is on this map. So again, it's the Portland General Electric's system, electrical system map. Now it is there's different types of electrical diagrams and whatnot. This one was geographically was scaled to geographic fidelity, which means basically it was to scale as to, like, if you were looking at the power lines from a satellite, it would look exactly like the shape and contours of what is actually physically built on the Earth. So so basically that was one of the layers. That's basically one of our base layers, the electrical map, and then you have the topography. Sort of your base, just like in Google Maps, you have like probably your base layer. One of the base layers is a satellite view. So the satellite view of the terrain, the electrical system diagram, and then on top of that there were additional layers. There was a weather map, like a radar and kind of Doppler radar, along with the cloud coverage, which was actually a satellite view of, not necessarily radar, but you know what I mean. But basically the weather map. Now, I would say up until this point, that's pretty typical of any sort of, power company, major power company transmission facility. Okay, basically it's our 10,000 foot view of the grid. Now, some of the special layers that I had never seen before that were unique to this situation were there was a map of all the counties that were under evacuation orders because of what was going on at that time, which were these wildfires. Okay, this is back in August 2020, and and as you can imagine, there's like certain counties in red, certain counties in yellow, which are it's kind of like with your storm warnings. You have a storm watch and a storm warning. Warning is kind of your highest extremity. Red, meaning that there's already been some shit going on in your area from that event. Yellow means it's kind of a warning, like, hey, we think that this thing is going to affect this county imminently. So there was the counties that were under evacuation orders. In this case, it was voluntary and mandatory. And then on top of that, there was a fire map. Now, mind you, we already have a weather map showing us the cloud coverage, which you can imagine there's going to be smoke coming from these fires. So you're going to have evidence of the fire from from the clouds. But then we have the actual fire map, which is something I've never seen before, which showed the actual, where the flames were actually burning, and along with the wind speed, and where these flames were projected to go based on that information. And I'm trying. I think those were essentially like the main kind of parts of this map that I remembered, and that we were looking at together. And man, I can't. I will never forget. I will never forget. That map was red. All right, my dears. Like, just the system. Let's just kind of look at the overall. Obviously, the end game here is to, what we care about at the end of the day is that system map, the electrical system map. Which tells us basically which lines are, kind of from a loading perspective, which lines are overloaded, which lines are, at risk of failure from excessive loading, etc. Now, that map was red. A lot of it was red. And there were parts of it flashing red. And that kind of goes, that's kind of the same thing for the counties, for that counties map with the red and the yellow. I remember a lot of red on that map. And again, flashing red on some of the more critical parts of our system. And now, at that time, it was basically triage. At that time, it was basically trying to keep, it was kind of like juggling 10 plates with two hands and having to kind of think in the back of your mind of which plates you were going to allow to fall. That's what triage is. Essentially. We had, part of my job was sort of recommend, mind you, I was new to the company. And so, my role was kind of limited, and I'm I'm basically under a mentorship. But, mind you, we're in the throes of a major fucking disaster. So, like, my trainer is basically tied up with his own aspect of responding to this emergency. And, I'm just trying to do what I can to, based on my, on my limited level of training, to keep the system alive, to keep the plates in the air. And, anyways, I have. So, anyways, that was kind of like my role. My sort of direct, I guess, role, if you will, 2 years ago, and kind of how the Portland wildfires sort of impacted me. I'm just gonna say it straight up. I was traumatized from this, not just because of the intense, not because of the long shift, kind of the long shifts and though that was probably a contributing factor, but stepping outside, stepping outside our little bunker, if you will, and seeing the smoke in the air, seeing the red skies, seeing all of that, not only just seeing it, but breathing it. Yeah, I don't know what to say that isn't fairly obvious. But it was a traumatizing experience for me. Mind you, I've spent my childhood loving disaster films. I love shit getting destroyed. Come on, guys, we all do, right? Anybody who's ever played SimCity or any sort of like simulation game where you get to create something, we love destroying shit. Come on, especially men. No, I'm just kidding. Well, women too. That's not a gender-specific thing. But like just human beings in general, and I would argue to say like, a lot of organisms, not just humans. Like I know personally, I used to build shit out of Legos, and I used to have hamsters that I would kind of have rummage around through these creations of mine that I would construct. But God damn it, let's be honest here. More often than not, there's something satisfying about watching a creation of yours get destroyed. But the key factor in that is that you got to be the one destroying it. Like if your friend comes over, like let's say we build a sandcastle, all right, and then like part of the fun of building a sandcastle is tearing it down, right? I think so, at least. And but when your friend decides to come over and like just step on your sandcastle and not tell you and destroy it himself, we're gonna get in a fight probably, right? So so with that having been said, our sort of like love for destruction that we don't really like to admit to ourselves, but that most of us have. That aside, I was not mentally prepared, girl, for the Portland wildfires. To be honest, I was not mentally prepared. Because what they don't tell you in those movies, or what they fail to portray in those films, I'm just thinking of Dante's Peak. That's one of my favorite kind of disaster films that involved it was kind of basically a retelling of the Mount St. Helens eruption. But girl, what they don't tell you in those films is that even as far as 10, 15, 20 miles away from the thing, you can't breathe. You cannot fucking breathe. And if you recall, 2020 was the year also of the pandemic. So at that time in the fall of 2020, or I should say late summer, nobody knew what the fuck was going on. And we were all under these different advisements, basically to, one day you'd hear like, okay guys, stay inside and stay 6 feet apart from everybody because we don't want to catch the COVID. But it's just a good idea in general not to even go inside because, most places have, recirculated air, HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems that, whose job is to kind of keep the air kind of circulating around the room. Which, unfortunately, in this case, or at least so we thought, would have the effect of kind of distributing the coronavirus, particles or whatnot, the virus things. It would have the kind of the unintended consequence of also dispersing the germs throughout the entire room that you were in. So, anyways, back during this wildfire event, we were told not to go outside, obviously because of the smoke in the air from the fires. And then we were told not to go inside because, COVID. So, given that circumstance, I would like to kind of ask you guys a question. Where do you go to breathe? I'm going to let you guys ponder that for a second, because I'm really curious to know what you guys would do. Where do you go to breathe? Any volunteers? I got to make this more participatory, obviously. Where do you go to breathe? I want to hear some. Come on, class. Don't be shy. Teacher's not gonna. I mean, I'm obviously on the other side of the screen. I don't have a whip or anything, and I'm not holding a grate above your head. So let me just allow any of you guys watching to offer a guess here. Where do you go to breathe? Any takers? Where do you go to breathe when the outside air is filled with smoke that fucks up your lungs, and the inside air is filled with COVID? Where do you go to breathe? Anybody? Let me take all the time you need. This is actually quite a fascinating question to sort of ponder. Simple but fascinating. Where do you go to breathe? As I turn off the fans around my house. Where do you go to breathe? Will, thank you. You live alone so you could stay inside with your air purifier. Oh, girl. You're a lucky girl. I hate you. You had an air purifier at home. That's awesome, actually. That's probably one of the best scenarios. Yeah. And wow, yeah. I mean, and you're lucky because that's fascinating, actually, because at that time I had a roommate who had asthma issues, and then his boyfriend was an engineer, like a mechanical engineer, so like was savvy enough to kind of be really good about air filters and replacing air filters in our home. And like he got like the really hardcore, like the HEPA, the air filters that I think filter out like even just the allergens and shit in the air. So like we were probably like one of the few places, one of the few apartments in our community that like you could not. I mean, you could maybe smell a little bit of smoke in the inside air, but you couldn't really like, it was essentially like it was pretty. You were pretty covered, Not everybody had that situation. And I will even say, I was famously, and these same roommates also, by the way, evicted me from that apartment during COVID, which some of you guys might recall there was a moratorium on that. But since I made the idiotic choice of being on a sublease with people I didn't know at the time, and it was a situation where I kind of had, I kind of got set up by an acquaintance that I knew from several years ago with an acquaintance of his, and oh god, you can always see the sort of like the degrees of separation here that sort of invite a lot of room for say betrayal and also betrayal and also just screwing me over on my home. So anyways, good answer, Will. Thank you for participating. You get a prize. I'll send you a dollar of mooch money in the mail. Mooch money is my own currency that I invented for myself back in 2004, before cryptocurrency essentially did the same thing. Yeah, and I'll send you a dollar of mooch money. Now, mind you, there's not that much mooch money out there in the world, so this shit might actually be worth something. So with mooch money, you can cash it in to any place that accepts mooch money, which is me. So really, I don't know. I guess that's what you call a pyramid scheme / circle jerk, whatever you want to call it. Anyways, moving on though. Yes. So I mean, back to the question of where do you go to breathe? So I think I got my point across. So I mean, I remember one day. Shit. I mean, I just kind of answer my question. Kind of answer the question myself here. I made the choice to smoke a menthol cigarette on my balcony window, or on my balcony overlooking the hellscape, in the horizon. I kind of managed to convince myself that menthol cigarette was the safest possible thing I could do for myself. When not just obviously not for my lungs, but kind of holistically for my own mental health, lungs, etc. So, menthol cigarettes, kids, love them. Love them before Obama takes them away. He's taking away your guns. He's also going to take away your menthol cigarettes, God damn it. So anyways, it's the mailman. Oh my god, it's a male woman this time. I'd never seen her before. Actually, let's go outside. I need to take a break for a second. On the subject of being able to breathe outside, I figure let's take this time to appreciate the air outside that we can breathe, and the fact that there's no wildfires around here that I know of. Wow, it's actually quite ominous outside, though. There's our lovely male official. That was a mailman, but you know, you gotta be all... I have to just do a Facebook Live. Thank you. Thanks so much. You too, ma'am. Drive safe. All right, I've been waiting for a check in the mail here, so I'm almost certain it has not come, because I'm pretty sure it was already supposed to come like a week ago. But nonetheless, I'm actually really, really loving this weather. Like, on the subject of wildfires, I have to say, you appreciate the rain a lot more when you've seen wildfires, man. You really do. You really do. Maybe not a hurricane, but I don't think we have a hurricane in store for us. Hopefully, if the Weather Channel's doing its job. Oh man, this is lovely though. Actually, it's like actually really pleasant outside. Anyways, back to the question of the wildfire situation. So, anyways, so needless to say, and maybe whatever you want to say about my own mental health capacities, I was traumatized from this event. Not really from, I mean, obviously the work hours were very intense. The work was really intensive, but just, I guess, the sheer totality of it all. I'm an environmentalist. I like to think I've spent a good chunk of my life, in this career and in this sort of domain, but also just in more broadly speaking, as a steward of the environment. And so when I see my world burning down around me, and then producing smoke everywhere around me that results in me not being able to breathe, I can't help but be a little bit traumatized. I'm sorry. So I was, and that resulted in one of these stupid little mental health crises in which somebody out there in the world felt that they needed to take it upon themselves to call the wellness police on me. And I've spent many a time on air prior, back then, really lambasting this poor little fuck. So I'm not gonna do that right now on air. I like to think that he and I have made good and shit. Now, but keep in mind though that this person was in Ohio, so this person managed to, from thousands of miles away, pick up the telephone and somehow get the wellness police to show up at my doorstep. And I don't know, anybody who knows me and knows some of my vices knows that I'm not the type of person who particularly likes to have the police show up at their door at some unforeseen hour of the day, especially when I'm smoking my bong. And I don't care if Oregon's a legal state or whatever. I don't give a fuck. I naturally get a little bit panicked when I see the police randomly show up at my doorstep. I don't know. Call me crazy. No pun intended. But like shit. So anyways, I'll be honest, I don't exactly remember what happened, but I basically have a reaction, a response to the police of this showing up uncalled for at my doorstep. And so they took it upon, they kind of interpreted my response as basically meaning that I was, quote, a harm to myself or to somebody else. And girl, if you ever need to know the magic words, out there to fuck with somebody, just say that to 911. Oh, I think he's a harm to himself or somebody else. And girl, you will get the police there. I mean, especially if you're in one of these like small podunk counties with a sheriff's office and nothing better to fucking do. They will bring the SWAT team practically sometimes to their door, and they will detain you. And I know this because I managed to do this exact same thing right back to the person who did it to me. It was just kind of funny in itself. Like, basically, I called 911 on his ass, and of course you have to embellish a few little details, of course. I told him, well, I have a friend who's a veteran who owns a gun, who I think he's a harm to himself or somebody else. And I shit you not, they Breonna Taylored his ass. Well, minus the killing part. But they took the battering ram to his front door because he didn't, I made sure, of course, he makes sure to do it in the most inconvenient time of the night, like 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And oh man, I have to say, I'm kind of proud of myself for just like the simplicity yet the effectiveness of my little vengeance tactics. But, I can't make this shit up, girl. Like, you think to yourself that there's a little bit of a threshold that law enforcement / mental health professionals look at when determining the risk of a situation and determining what resources to deploy and determining how many lives to fuck up. But no. Of course not. There's no nuance to anything anymore, right? So anyways, wellness police shows up at my doorstep, and I end up basically detained for 5 days. Mind you, this is detained at a mental health facility, not a jail. So I basically get to have the jail plus better food and a nurse, essentially, and board games, better board games. That's basically the difference between a psych facility and a jail, in my mind. And plus the door, shit. No, I can't even say. The doors are nicer. You get actual doors instead of bars. But that's a little deceiving because those doors are usually like, are simply basically just painted over steel bars. Just painted with some nice interior design. So anyways, that's kind of like what, that's basically what led to me, so missing those 5 days of work during this whole shit show resulted in me getting fired from that job. Believe it or not, and one likes to question that and say, well, gosh, I mean, back then it was COVID. People were taking 2 weeks off left and right for just being thought of, for being suspected of having COVID. But girl, I'm sorry, 5 days out because of some involuntary medical emergency that somebody else called the cops on you from 1,000 miles away in Ohio to Portland. Well, I'm sorry, we're going to have to fire you. So, that whole thing. So that resulted in me losing my first ever $100,000 a year job in Portland, Oregon, which back then was my dream job, to work in the operations center and such. So, needless to say, I'm a little bit pissed about this. Oh, yes, and it gets better. So after I get fired on my ass from a $100,000 job that I'd moved clear across the country for, my then boyfriend, or whatever you want to call him, decides it's an opportune time to break up with me. Yeah, and now mind you, I guess one could look at the situation a little bit, with a little bit of objectivity and say, well, shit, this kid's no longer making $100K a year. He's no longer worth, he's no longer the guy that I thought I was dating. So let's dump his ass. Okay. So not only did Jared, my ex-boyfriend, choose that time to basically break up with me, but he did so in one of the worst possible ways imaginable, by basically not picking me up to evacuate my shit from my own, what was then my apartment. And so imagine that the sky is red around you, and your neighborhood may or may not be under the gun of a fire, of a fast-moving wildfire that could change direction at any moment. I'm waiting at my curb, bags in hand, waiting for a car that never fucking shows up. Oh, man. I've seen so many end-of-the-world films, like, apocalypse shit. And one thing I always kind of comforted myself with was that if we ever did have, face some sort of end-of-the-world event, or even just like a localized major natural disaster, the sort of the romantic thing that we tell ourselves is that at least we'll have our significant other, at least we'll have our loved ones to hold our hand while we face imminent death. I don't know, call me a romantic, but that's kind of what I had sort of understood to be the case during such an apocalypse. But no, of course, that was too much to ask for. So instead, bitch doesn't show up, and then, oh, God, sometimes I wish, I know that some of you guys who've never heard this situation before think I'm making this up, and it's, I don't think I could make something like this up if I tried. It's kind of like the political situation, and not to go into politics, but, the Donald Trump thing, you can't make this shit up. And man, I thought I had quite the imagination, girl. But nonetheless, ex-boyfriend decides to break up with me at that time. And also, my friend, his two friends that I just happen to be roommates with, because remember, this is during the pandemic, so everybody's kind of hanging out. We're told that we should hang out with our own little bubbles of people. So I just happened to hang out with this bubble of people that were all affiliated with the ex-boyfriend, and oh man, having that, isolating yourself in these little social bubbles is fine and all if you really trust these people and if they're not awful fucking douchebags. But if you have the unfortunate luck of happening to surround yourself, just happening to put yourself into a bubble with these toxic fucking people, and then they suddenly decide to go behind your back and evict you from your own goddamn home during the pandemic, well, I'm sorry, son. That's just bad luck. Sorry. Oh, gosh. Let me think here. I think that's kind of the gist of my August 2020. Hashtag 2020. So anyways, the whole reason I even went into this subject to begin with is because I caught up with this, with a different ex of mine. And I don't want to name names because this particular ex is not the only ex that I truly really have ire for is as you can imagine, Jared, the Portland guy. And I didn't even mention, I failed to even mention, because there's more, honey. There's more to the story. So like a week after this whole shit show, I don't even know if this is this is relevant, but I feel like this kind of has its own trauma that kind of, I think, detracts from the overall message of the story I'm trying to tell you. But like, in a nutshell, that now ex-boyfriend basically like physically basically raped me. And like, I don't want to get into I hate, that word is such a loaded term, and there's a lot more nuance to the situation than what the term merits really. So I don't even. Let's just put a push pin on that. But it does have to be mentioned because it obviously did factor into my headspace at the time. So at this point, having just been like, physically and sexually abused by my own ex-boyfriend at the time, remember, after being kicked out of my apartment, after losing my job, after in the midst of these wildfires. Yeah, that was kind of altogether collectively a very traumatizing series of events for me. In fact, I have coined that personally for myself as the Great Portland She-bacle. And so, I'll sort of remind our viewers here of what a she-bacle is, specifically. So you guys are probably familiar with the term debacle, D-E-B-A-C-L-E. A debacle, you can look it up on Google. But, and for some of you math savvy people, my fellow engineering friends, and really everybody should know this type of math in my opinion, but an integration function, all right? An integration function, for some of the less math comfortable, and it is basically an accumulation function. You basically have a function and you basically accumulate the sum, the result over a period of time. It's kind of like the equivalent of like, I don't even know. Well, some of you guys have done I've taken a curve on a graph and then you chop it off and then color in the area underneath the curve. That's kind of the visual way of portraying an integration function. The example I like to use in this case is, with the debacle, is imagine for a second a drag queen named Debacle. All right? And this is for a second. Let's put her on the top of a hill or even a mountain. A mountain that is comprised of elements of her own ego and, basically other drag queens that she might have beaten out in RuPaul's Drag Race, combined with, perhaps the accumulated tips that she has managed to collect over her lifetime. All right? You take this drag queen at the top of this little mountain here, and you just sort of nudge her, you just sort of push her off the hill. You kind of push her off the mountain, all right? At which point begins she starts tumbling down this mountain. The drag queen named Debacle. She starts tumbling down the mountain. We don't know where the bottom of the mountain is, all right? But what we do know is that she just keeps on tumbling, and the further along she tumbles, the more speed she gathers, and the more velocity, the more momentum she gathers, because this is a big old bitch, all right? And let's remind our viewers what momentum is defined as. Momentum is defined as mass times speed. All right? So that thing, Debacle, the drag queen named Debacle, was tumbling and 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 tumbling down. And nobody knows where the bottom is, honey. Nobody knows. In fact, if there is a bottom, it better be a solid bottom, because by that time she reaches it, she's going to have a lot of momentum on her side. She might just possibly break through the goddamn thing. and then so forth. The process repeats. So that's kind of I guess we'll call it a dramatic interpretation of what an integration function is. So in the case of my she-bacle, I mean, that's really what it felt like. It felt like every morning I would wake up and something new, awful would happen. Just when I thought that the Lord could possibly get no more clever at coming up with bullshit for me to have to deal with. So imagine that type of situation for 4 months. Well, we'll call it 3 months, really. I mean, but so for those next 3 or 4 months in fall of 2020, I was homeless. I no longer had a job. Oh, and here's the kicker. I didn't even qualify for unemployment insurance from this $100,000 a year job because I only worked at the time for a certain number of months. I hadn't even yet worked there 6 months when this all happened. So, and I didn't know enough at the time about unemployment, and of course unemployment varies by state as well. So, I mean, the state of Oregon's unemployment requirements could be different from what I was used to in Ohio. So I just thought if you lost your job, you were entitled to some level of benefit, And so after waiting months on, remember it's during COVID, so everybody's trying to cash in on unemployment. Everybody's trying to call the government needing help. And so the government, especially in Oregon at the time, was just overwhelmed. So it literally took me like a month. I think even longer than a month to get a hold of the unemployment office just for them to then tell me, sorry, kid, you don't qualify. So, again, she-bacle. So anyways, I just have to tell you that I had to I never really, honestly, I've never sat down and written this all out. I used to have live journal when I used to kind of sort of chronicle things in my life. The only time I ever really recalled these events in writing was when I had to write the police report for the DA's office to try to file charges against this motherfucker. And I have to say, writing that police report was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to write in my life. In fact, undoubtedly. And I'm including my thesis. I mean, I'm including all of my major 200-page technical papers that I've had to write in my career. But god damn it, this, I'm trying to think of how long this police report, this whole kind of recounting of my fucking situation was. I mean, it was the hardest thing I ever had to write, and it took me. It probably took. It wasn't even until it wasn't until almost a year later, really, that I even had the balls to put this together and file it. And of course, by then, I don't think. The Portland police do jack squat for you. Now, what they will do is respond to a fucking wellness call, and they'll proceed they'll make the choice to kind of take that case on and proceed to ruin my life a little bit with their shit. But God forbid if I had to file a rape charge against my ex-boyfriend for that. Yeah, you'd be fuck that shit. So, anyways. The reason I'm telling you guys this is because it's I was kind of sharing this last night with another ex-boyfriend of mine, a much nicer ex-boyfriend, mind you. And someone, to be fair, someone I still care about. Not out of any sort of malice or jealousy or anything, just because, it's my opinion that when you say I love you to somebody, I mean I love you kind of generally for the rest of my life, unless, minus any possible event of betrayal and or rape or whatever the fuck. But yeah, so this other ex-boyfriend, the trucker one, who, funny enough, I also met in Portland. Not met, but perhaps re-met in Portland. Anyways, I was sharing this with him last night, catching up with him after not speaking to each other for 5 years. And, I could tell that he was overwhelmed by the story. Mind you, it's an overwhelming story, but I guess I was surprised that, I don't know. I don't know what I was expecting, but I don't know. The feeling of abandonment that I was undergoing while I was in my she-bacle, those feelings came back when he sort of, with his response. It really felt because I think I kind of had shut him down to a point where we just kind of ended our call. And like, yeah, it was kind of strange. Like, I mean, he came up with some sort of bullshit excuse, like, I have to go, like, blah 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 is on fire. I don't know what the fuck, but basically he took the opportunity to basically like check himself out of our little phone call of catching each other up on our lives. So it just made me. It really reminded me of like the feeling of abandonment that I went through, like when a friend of mine. Anyways, yeah, I think you guys get the point. And I have to say, it's not the first time. I mean, it's not the first time in my life I felt abandoned. I mean, to be fair, like, I just happen to live in a small, like, I have a sparse family. I mean, my dad's not even alive anymore, and just getting, what's the expression? Good help is so hard to find these days, right? Good help is so fucking hard to find, and if we're being truly fair here, I mean, it was pandemic. Everybody lost. I mean, fuck. I would say a third of us lost our jobs. A third of us were in, a sizable chunk of us, of everybody, were also down on our asses, down on our luck. So, like, just having the resources and the capability to help each other out, to provide assistance, to me and whatever to each other was extremely limited. I mean, we were essentially, we were in the unknown. Nobody knew if we were gonna make it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, shit. So my own shit, asking for help from people, in my situation back at that time was just impossible, infeasible, and I think I knew that, and I knew kind of to expect very limited help, but that does not mean that you still don't feel abandoned, no matter what excuses you give yourself for why these people can't help you, And so, but, it was odd because last night when I had caught up with Matthew and he basically kind of had that same reaction, yeah, I couldn't help but feel that. It feels very lonely sometimes. And, I think I'm lucky because I've generally grown up in that same type of environment, so where I've just always learned to how to take care of myself when I need to. But in that moment in time, I just was incapable of taking care of myself anymore. Like, I was traumatized. I was penniless, and I was in Portland, which was a city I really did not know anybody in. The few people I knew was that toxic fucking group of people through the ex-boyfriend that raped me and kicked me out of the house. So, yeah. But I guess I just have to vent on this a little bit because I don't know, like, it's extremely frustrating, and it's really given me, frustrating is a polite word to use, quite frankly. And I just, like, I remember back then when I was on, doing these Facebook Lives while homeless, and I was basically begging people for money, and even to the, begging people for money through a nonprofit organization that I had started, specifically to, like, have a way of saving face while begging y'all for money. Which, mind you, that nonprofit organization is still around. I mean, mind you, it's kind of fledgling lately. Crimson Brew Studios, which contains Crimson House, which I would love to turn it to have sort of evolve into a housing organization for the purpose of housing people that go through she-bacles like I did, So I hate calling it a homeless shelter because, that has a stigma to it, and it's not going to be a homeless shelter because, they're going to be, they're going to have a home. This is going to be their home. And I don't want to call it a halfway house because halfway house has its own sort of stink to it too. It's a living community, and I'm not just kind of making up I'm not just making up a euphemism here. I mean, I do want these communities. I want these houses to be socioeconomically diverse. I want some of these to just be simple Airbnbs that are rented out to people with money to sort of fund the whole operation. So, in my own head, I want this to kind of become a sort of self-reliant. So it would be subsidized by the people who are bougie enough to afford the kind of the sticker price. But however, the priority of housing selection would be given to people who are obviously on their ass, who have nowhere else to go. Because I was one of these people. And I remember, I'm sure a lot of my friends especially, like, are familiar with your local HIV/AIDS organization in your community. In Columbus, we had, we have Equitas Health, formerly known as ARC, AIDS Resource Center. Out in Portland, we had what's called the Cascade AIDS Project, CAP. And even here in central Louisiana, we have CLASS, which is the Central Louisiana AIDS Support Service. Now, these organizations are quite huge, are quite large organizations, quite well funded, quite sophisticated in terms of their operations and their effectiveness. And myself, I've volunteered for some of these organizations myself, and if I'm being honest here, I've admired a lot of their work to do, as well as the competency at which they do it. Nonetheless, I went to CAP, Cascade AIDS Project, bags in tow, and I needed help. And they were unable to help me with my housing situation, And to be fair, I mean, that type of organization, their mission is not geared to people like me. I don't have HIV. I'm very fortunate to not have ever had HIV or AIDS. But I was unlucky in the sense at that time that I was not qualified for assistance. And again, their job is helping people with HIV, which they're going to need more, they're more likely to need that assistance, if I'm being really fair here. So but nonetheless, I identified this gap personally, that there's really not anything out there for, in terms of organizations and organizational support and resources and what have you. There's nothing like that for just somebody, maybe a gay person that loses their job in the middle of their, midlife and finds themselves on the streets at 30-some years old, We hear so often the cases of youth, of kids, of teenagers, coming out to their parents, and their parents just having, and just the family kind of, the whole family, the family kicking them out of the house, and, and a teenager ending up on the streets, because of that. But you don't often hear of this type of phenomenon happening with adults, with sort of young and even middle-aged adults. And so there really, at least, in my mind, there was not anywhere to turn to. And so that's kind of, the genesis, I guess, if you will, of where Crimson Rouge Studios came from. I mean, this thing had existed before, before my Portland She-bacle, but it was much more limited. It was much less ambitious in scope. Really, it was just kind of a dressed up Shopify page. It was kind of a little, a social organization. It was basically a slush fund for me to hold to hold events, big parties and such, and then have it be, have it look legit and have it sort of be mandated, and supported by tax exemption, for donations and shit. So that's kind of the genesis of where Crimson Rouge Studios came from. I mean, I don't think I ever really shared that entire story, because I know I've probably spammed the fuck out of you guys with all this shit, trying to donate to Crimson Rouge Studios and support Crimson Rouge Studios and get involved in Crimson Rouge Studios and blah blah blah, but without really giving you guys the full context of where it kind of was born from, and sort of the history of it, the fact that I had to literally kind of form this organization on the fly while homeless in order to survive. And I don't know, I think it's kind of a cool story myself. I mean, but yeah, that's kind of where that came from. And anyways, I had to kind of just get that out there, because I've never really documented this whole shit show. And it's hard for me to really sit down and write it all out like I normally would, like I used to back in my live journal days and such. So I need to kind of just get that out there, because I don't think I've told people the story on an individual basis, but I've never really put it out there in the world, out there for me to kind of, to have a record of it, sort of a record of truth to it, I guess, really. So anyways, that's my venting of that shit show. And actually, I have to say, surprisingly, it kind of does feel good to get it off my chest. Because I'm going to make sure to like save this video, and maybe someday I'll sit down and properly write it into my autobiography, because that's definitely got to go somewhere in the public record. I mean, I did not survive for, this, yeah, I'm, and I will say, I am, you hear often about people with their, that undergo adversity, they undergo the shit show in their lives, sometimes they even make a Hallmark film out of it. And I used to, one of my sayings, one of my favorite quotes that I always, over in my life is from the film Mulan. And I think it goes like this: the flower that blooms in adversity is the rarest and most beautiful of all. The flower that blooms in adversity is the rarest and most beautiful of all. I mean, I love that quote. I've always loved that quote, even before this She-bacle, But what the quote, I think this quote implicitly sort of, mentions this, but like what I think a lot of people fail to grasp, including myself, from that same quote is there are a lot of flowers that don't bloom. There are a lot of flowers that die. For every flower that does bloom in adversity and is the rarest and most beautiful of all, there are hundreds that die. That's why the word rarest is so critical in that sentence, I think, because we only hear the stories of the people that survive. We only hear the stories of the people that made it long enough to tell the story. We have no idea. We are not even aware of the hundreds of stories that are not told. And like, God damn it, girl. You'd be amazed, shocked, really, at how many of those stories are out there. Undiscovered, unrealized, unknown, unheard. And girl, it's really important that when you see those stories, that you take them to heart, because again, we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg that made it above water. We don't see the vast amount of the iceberg that is drowning. And yeah, that's all I have to say on that. Even with my story, I'm realizing I have to be cautious, because my own ex-boyfriend was overwhelmed by the story to the point of which I think this somehow caused another rift between us, So like, I'm realizing that I have to kind of dose out what I tell people of my story, because it really does sometimes overwhelm people to a really, it overwhelms me a little bit. But anyways, all that to say, I kind of wanted to get that off my chest a little bit. And I guess I'm realizing that, like, I'm not the only one who went through a She-bacle. It's really easy in the throes of our She-bacle to kind of, I think, romanticize it, and to kind of tell ourselves that, oh, wow, if I manage to survive this, then we can make a great film out of it and maybe sell it to Hallmark. But you have to remember that in order to be able to do that, you have to first survive the entirety of the story. And then not only that, but in the trauma of it all, you have to almost learn how to tell the story without completely losing your mind. So on that note, kids, I don't really have any other moral to the story other than that. And you guys have been pretty quiet, probably overwhelmed as well in a similar regard as my ex-boyfriend. So I'll just leave it to that. And well, fuck, we'll do what we did, like kind of similar to how we did at the old retreats, where we follow the story with a song. And so I'm gonna play a song to kind of lead us out with. And I bet you anything, the song is gonna get this entire video flagged and taken down from the interwebs for copyright infringement. But you know what? You know how many fucks I give? Oh, and actually, I haven't even put a lot of thought into the song selection like I otherwise might have. But I'm gonna play a song, and that I love. Oh, nope, nope. Why the fuck? Nope, nope. Technical moment. Technical moment. Volume is too low. We are gonna. I gotta immerse myself in this one, baby. This one deserves to be heard in all of its glory. So we're gonna turn on the speaker, and I think the speaker's probably dead because I didn't charge it. I failed to charge the speaker. So let's see here. No, oh, it ain't even on. Girl, it ain't even have enough battery to flash the damn red light at me telling me that's low on battery. Fuck. All right, I'm sorry, little guy. Let's get you charged up here. I could charge you, but I'd have to teach. But then again, I think I've taught enough this last 30 minutes or so. So, I'm gonna go ahead and fire her up again. Blanca, that's the name of this particular speaker. Okay, she looks like she's on. I don't think we need all that lights shit. Given that we're low on battery, why waste it, right? All right, got that fired up. And we're gonna go over to the, I'm just gonna have a seat. And, hey, are you, oh, why are people messaging me, hey, are you okay? Why don't they just watch the goddamn broadcast? They didn't get to determine if I'm okay. Shit, just stupid questions. All right. All right, here's a song I'm gonna lead us out with, all right? Maybe. If my computer is ever so cooperative. All right. Oh, I love that song so much. And like, anyways, well, that concludes the broadcast for today. Well, this has been Mike George coming at you live from Crimson House in Alexandria, Louisiana. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of someone else because they probably need it and are not telling you. Until then, à tout à l'heure.